Hello and welcome to our Sustaining Healthy Relationships podcasts. In March 2022, Relate NI commissioned Ulster University to carry out evidence-based research on healthy relationships and their importance across our lifespans. These podcasts delve a little deeper into our findings and we bring them to life with experts unpacking particular findings. Enjoy. Bronagh Starrs, you are very welcome. You are a renowned psychotherapist, writer and trainer in the area of young people and adolescents. Bronagh, can I ask you, why did you choose this particular specialism?
Well, I suppose I was always interested in working with adolescents. I was a music teacher way back in a former existence, and I became, in terms of my own personal journey, I was moving into wider development, and I got more interested in young people in terms of what was going on inside their heads rather than how well they were playing an F-sharp minor scale. And it was a natural evolution when I trained as a psychotherapist to then go specialise with adolescents. Yeah.
So, Bronagh, you and I are of a certain vintage, we could happily say. Is it more difficult for young people growing up now than it was, say, 30 years ago? And how is that presenting? So I've, 3 kids. I have a young man who's 25, twin daughters who are 21. I just see the terrain that they're trying to negotiate very different to what I suppose we would have had to negotiate. And also my kids are city kids. I grew up very rurally. So there's a whole package of stuff around that I think is different. And I think that their worlds are different. But how are you seeing that presented?
Yeah, I think their worlds are much more complicated than our worlds where when we were growing up, like we were teenagers in the 1980s, and we lived in a very repressed world. So there were holding frameworks that we had. One was family, and I know certainly I grew up in a Catholic family, and it was a mum and a dad, and they stayed together, and lots of us had parents who should never have got together and certainly should never have stayed together, but that's what you do. So that was a holding framework. And nowadays, people are saying, I want to be safe, I want to be happy, they're my basic human rights. So they're not staying in relationships that aren't working for them, which is great. But adolescents have a more complicated experience in family now. It's not a better, it's not worse, it's just more confusing and complicated at times. For example, I had to figure out who I was in relationship to my family, which was a very straightforward family. But nowadays I might be figuring out my identity in relation to my parents and their new partners and step siblings and all sorts of stuff. So that has moved from a repressed family system to an expressive family system. And then we've had a similar thing around moral values. For example, church had a very strong hold on people in the 80s, and that has kind of spectacularly dismantled. So young people are figuring out their own moral code, which is a wonderful thing, except that developmentally they're incapable of doing that. So they get into all sorts of bother, and there have been different ones, sexuality and gender and all sorts of stuff, very repressed. So we live in this much more expressive experience, which is actually wonderful and really healthy, but more complicated. School was another one. When we went to school, you showed up as a student. Now they're very holistic places. You bring your whole humanity into school. And a school is a place now where delivering the curriculum is the easy part. It's managing the behavioural and emotional needs of the kids because they bring everything with them into school. So you've all those frameworks that have really dismantled, and we're the better for it, except that we don't have new frameworks to offer young people, so they tend to get pathologised. And the other thing then, of course, is social media. One of the things that happened for us was, like yourself, you said you grew up in the country. I grew up in the country as well. When you came home from school, you didn't see anybody, maybe until Saturday afternoon in the town or something. Where young people are hyper connected to each other these days. And there's a part of the brain called the default mode network. It's just where, just when you're doing nothing, you're just sitting and literally doing nothing. And there's a great experience of creativity comes in those moments. And that's where the sense of self gets really developed. That big existential question in adolescence, who am I? I would sit on the top of my bed in the dark with night lights on and listening to my Leonard Cohen tapes, and Leonard was the only person that understood me. And the default mode network is so important for a sense of self to emerge. However, young people these days, if they've 2 or 3 seconds where they're not doing anything, they're lifting their phone. So they're more in relationship to their phone, which is a valid social network in and of itself, or social landscape, but also they are more in relationship to that than they are to themselves. So they have a much more externalised sense of self than we had, and I think that complicates life for them as well. Yeah.
I've noticed that certainly even in our house, people are sitting and they're having a conversation with you and there might be phones in their hand. So how do you get the balance of going, actually, could we just not have phones around so we could have like a conversation? Or I'd certainly do that in our house. There'd be no phones around dinner time or for sitting down and having a meal and a conversation. Or when you go out to the pub, I mean, I've gone out to restaurants and I see adults sitting, there's not a word spoke between the two adults. Yeah. They're just sitting scrolling on their phones the entire time. And it becomes... certainly I know when I do it, if I'm on Facebook for a while or Twitter, I can feel like anxiety starting to rise in my body, and then I put it down, and then I'm going, right, what was I doing? And then I go back and try to do it again. And I was doing a workshop up in Queen's a couple of months ago, and there was a young woman there and we were talking about healthy relationships with ourselves. And she said, we were talking about the use of social media, and there is ways to use social media that is healthy and nourishing as opposed to destructive. And she said that she was a student from England. She had she's 3 dogs, 3 pugs. She absolutely loved her pugs, and she missed her pugs terribly when she came to Belfast. So she decided she was taking herself home for the weekend to hang out with the pugs and have the bestest time. She got back in the plane on Sunday, looked on her phone, and she realised she'd spent 6 hours on TikTok while she was there. And she was like, I can't believe I did that. And I said, well, what was the learning, for you? But it's so addictive, Bronagh. How do you kind of try to balance that? I want to do this, I want to spend time on my pugs, but I end up just, scrolling mindlessly on social media.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's useful in terms of family life is just what you said, put boundaries. So there are particular times when the phones are offline, particularly when you have teenagers in the house. Morning times, no phones, because you'll go into... You've already shouted your teenage son 5 times, and you go into the room and he's sitting with one trouser leg on, half the shirt on, and he's sitting on the phone, and he's just paralysed. So that's not useful. Those boundaries are good. But the other thing to do is to make sure that you are taking ownership and managing your use of the phone. Because if you're not managing social media is managing you. And it's very useful to just remember that. And we will, typically lose many minutes of our life every day, like the girl lost the 6 hours. And then one of the things that we say is, oh, I'm so busy. And, if you took your screen time away, very often you wouldn't be just as busy. Yeah.
But I know even going out delivering workshops on social media and talking to people, they're like, oh, I can't put my phone down. And it's that, it's not a trauma response, but, I can't turn my phone off at night. Somebody might need me, so we're on that high alert all the time. Yeah. So how does your brain get time to relax and kind of calm down and, just recalibrate?
Well, exactly. So there are 2 things. One is it gives us great comfort. I put a post on social media and I look to see how many likes. I go, oh, so I feel a little bit better that I got 2 more likes and 1 love and a comment. That's wonderful. So it really helps me feel better about myself. But the other thing is we've grown accustomed to being hyper connected with people. So I don't know how to not be hyper connected. So I have to leave my phone on all the time so that we have a sense of urgency around that as well, which has just come with the territory. I don't know how we navigate that. Yeah.
Can we talk a bit about young people struggling to attend school? So we're looking at emotional-based school avoidance and stuff related at the minute. But anxiety symptoms, panic attacks, OCD, rigid eating. I'm sure you see this present all the time. So
all the time. And, parents will come to my office with their very anxious teenagers and they ask 2 questions. How can we stop them having panic attacks, and how can we get them back to school? And I always say to them, you're asking the wrong questions. So all of these things, those things that you're just after talking about, Kelly, they're all symptoms of something deeper. So rather than focusing on the symptom, a phased return to school or breathing techniques to manage a panic attack, which are, they all have their place. But what is at stake is that the young person has no faith in themselves. So what happens is they are in a part of their brain, the cerebral cortex. There's like way too much activity there. And when we're in the cerebral cortex, we think. It's a place, it's called the seat of thought. So we think and we figure out, we pay attention. But when there's too much energy there, we don't think, we overthink, overanalyze. We think our way through the world all of the time. And these young people have two basic themes in their life. One is because they're overthinking, it's always negative overthinking. The first one is, I'm not okay. I'm inadequate. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not strong enough. If I go to college, what if I fail? Nobody will talk to me. So that piece. But the second piece of it is I'm not, or the world is an inhospitable place. The world is a scary place. So, for example, a very anxious kid will be terrified about the future and terrified about growing up, and there will be a loss around the future. You know, I'll not get to see mummy anymore. Mummy will die, or, you know, there's always bad things. So they are very fear-based, and what happens then is, because there's so much stress there, they start to look for a neurochemical called oxytocin, which is a comfort chemical. So you get the oxytocin through a hug, through, you know, if you're driving home tonight going, oh, I'm going to light the fire and jump into pajamas and sit there, you know, that's lovely, that's comfort. So you've just got oxytocin. Or it happens if you're just stepping into the bath, you know, that moment where you just sit down in the lovely bubble bath, that's oxytocin release. So these kids become oxytocin addicts. They're looking for comfort all of the time, and they often recruit a parent into their comfort zone. So typically that parent's two strategies are going to be reassurance. Don't worry, darling, nothing bad's going to happen, and you're so beautiful, and you're so smart, and you're able to do everything. Don't worry about this. And a lot of reassurance, which doesn't work. And then the second strategy that parents will adopt is trying to build the kids' self-esteem up, because when they're so negative, they just have no faith in themselves. They feel terrible about themselves usually. And they're just analysing in such a morbid way. So build this child's self-esteem up. So giving them loads of compliments, loads of wonderful affirmations, which don't work either.
Loads of things.
And loads of things, of course.
Yes,
absolutely.
don't forget the things.
The things, loads of
Bag
things.
of things.
And that will create comfort. But comfort just keeps a person reinforced in their comfort zone. So we have this kid who lives in a comfort zone, maybe with a comfort parent, and there's other things in there, you know. Often geographically, the comfort zone is very small, so it's just my bedroom or being in the house, maybe one other place. So there might be one or two friends, maybe quite a lot of the time social isolation, favourite foods, maybe the family pet. That's about it, and of course my screens. And a lot of young people had that experience of living in a comfort zone for a number of years, and they were able to manage to go outside it. It was difficult, but they could. So they were able to go to school with an effort. They were able to go to a drama class or chat to people or whatever. And then COVID came, and then the government said, you must stay in your comfort zone. You cannot leave your comfort zone, and all your comfort parents must stay there as well. And all these threatening places are going to close. And school is a very threatening landscape for these teenagers, because there's two things they have to navigate in school. And one is the academic landscape. So when you have no faith in yourself, you're always worried about, you know, what if I fail, and what if I don't pass, and what if I let the teacher down, what if I let myself down? And they're so driven and perfectionist, they don't make a mistake. And then the other landscape they have to navigate is the social one. Now, I feel terrible about myself. And there's a lovely saying, confidence isn't about walking into a room and knowing that you're better than everyone else. Confidence is about walking into a room and not having to compare yourself to anyone else. But these kids show up through comparison. That's how they relate to other people. So I'm sitting here going, oh my God, Kelly's so much smarter than me, and she's got more money than me, and she drives a better car than me. And then I'm monitoring the conversation going, oh God, Bronagh, don't say that sounds really stupid or whatever. So it is utterly exhausting being out socially. So that's why school is a threat. And then when, you know, back to COVID, when the government said you can't go outside your comfort zone, that happened for a number of months. And then the schools opened again. Come on ahead in, kids, let's go back to class. And what happened is all those children got entrenched, and they actually were not able to come out of their comfort zone. So we had an epidemic of anxiety and school-based anxiety before COVID, and I don't know what the word is for beyond the margins of an epidemic that is happening now. For example, I was given a talk in a school there a number of months ago in Tipperary, and I was talking to the school principal, and he said there's 470 pupils in our school, the secondary school. And on any given day, there's 100 young people off, and almost all of them it's school anxiety. So that's something that happens. We look at how do we get them back to school? How do we get them to stop taking the panic attacks? How do we get them to kind of modulate their OCD? But the big question is, how do you get these kids to extend their comfort zone? That's the bigger piece, actually.
And the $1 million question is, how do you get them to extend it, Bronagh?
Well, there are 4 stages in that. Now, what happens is people tend to move to stage 4 immediately, and it's premature. Even therapists will do that. You know, if a kid comes to see me and they're very anxious, mindfulness techniques and breathing techniques and all this sort of stuff.
Yoga, throw a bit of yoga.
A wee bit of yoga in there, absolutely. I mean, and they're very good, and there's a place for them. But I actually find that the breathing techniques aren't very useful for young people. I had a young fella come to me recently, and he was round the houses with other therapists, and he's very, very anxious, and he walked in and he goes, if you make me do breathing techniques, I will break your teeth. And I goes, I promise I won't be doing that. And the difficulty with the breathing techniques is these kids are so psychologically agitated if they're having a panic attack, and their breath is very agitated, and you kind of got to be a bit zen to do your breathing. So, and talking about a phased return to school, if a kid's not able to go to school, or even in the morning, you know, a lot of these kids, they are totally determined to go to school. And then the thought of it that morning, as you go to bed at night, go, I'm so going to school in the morning. You get up in the morning, I just can't. And what has happened is that the threat that was out there is imminent now, and I am in complete meltdown. There's a part of the brain called the amygdala, so they get into this flight or fight piece. And when you're in that place, you're not going to school. And we talk about phased returns. It's a bit like there's a wild tiger right outside that door, and I'm terrified of it. And you're trying to talk me into, okay, well, we don't have to go out for the whole morning, but Bronagh, could you just go out and stand out there for 15 minutes? You know, it's like, hello.
Yeah, you're back in again? No.
Absolutely. You're not getting the point. It's like going out there at all. So stage 1 is... I was talking about these kids have very high levels of stress. So the stress chemical is cortisol. So their cortisol levels are through the roof. And that's what happens with overthinkers. So, for example, let's say I heard a loud bang outside the room. I go, oh my God, what was that? And in that moment, I just go into that like fight or flight momentarily. Will I run? Will I jump? Will I fight? What am I going to do? And then I'm like, oh, it's just the dog. So immediately the cortisol levels surged, and then they were absorbed back into my cells, and I'm back in a nice equal level place again. And we're all good to go. But if I'm one of those kids who's in the cerebral cortex, who overthinks all the time, I'll hear the noise and go, oh, what if it's burglars? And what if they kill mummy, and when they kill me and they steal everything and they'll burn the house down, and oh my God, we'll all die. And or around school, oh my God, I can't go because I'm so stupid, and I'm going to miss mummy, and nobody's going to talk to me, and what if I fail? I can't do this. And our brains are wonderful, masterful pieces of nature. However, they do not understand the difference between an experience and a fantasy. So while I'm sitting freaking out about the noise and what it could be, and a lot of their thoughts start with 2 words, what if it's this, what if it's that, but it's always negative. It's never, what if I win the lottery? Yeah. So what if this, or the catastrophe about going to school. The cortisol is surging around their system, so they've hugely high cortisol levels. And nothing is going to happen for those kids unless we get their cortisol levels lowered. So if you're listening to this and you're wondering how to do it, just Google it. There's loads of things. Trauma tapping technique is really good. It's much more accessible than breathing. So just Google trauma tapping technique. There's a little 4 or 5 minute animated video. And when you tap, you're activating a cluster of nerve cells that goes to the central nervous system, that goes to that fight or flight amygdala part of your brain that goes, shh, you're okay, you're safe. So it's very accessible. Kid can do it in a school, for example, or on their way to school. There's the diving reflex. Put your face into a bowl of freezing ice cold water. Put as cold a water as you can get and put ice cubes in it. And that will activate what's called the vagus nerve, and it'll calm the nervous system down. It's the same as having a freezing cold shower or jumping into the sea, except teenagers typically don't like to do those. So I have all my clients do that. You get up in the morning, and instead of the overthinking, they will do their tapping. They'll come downstairs, and they will also do the diving reflex, head into the bowl. And you know, if you put your head into the bowl and you're having a panic attack, it'll queer knock the panic attack out of you, let me tell you. But the other thing I do is, parents, if you're parenting a very anxious young person, your cortisol levels are through the roof as well. So you have to lower your cortisol levels too.
Because you literally feed off each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cortisol is contagious, actually. You're ever sitting beside someone and you feel fine, and you're sitting beside them for half an hour, and then you're as stressed as they are at the end of it. It's because we sweat the cortisol out a couple of centimetres out of our body, and that hormone will actually move through your pores into your system. Your cortisol levels are going to be higher at the end of the conversation. So that's step one, to lower the cortisol levels, and I call that giving you wiggle room. So if your cortisol levels are 9.5 out of 10, if we can bring them down even to 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10, there's a wee bit of wiggle room before you go over to 10 out of 10. And once you hit 10 out of 10, you're in meltdown, you're in panic attack, your OCD's off the charts, you're self-harming, it's not good. So that's step one. And then step two is to help young people to change that narrative in their head. You say to them, there are 3 voices in your head, and the cerebral cortex voice is turned up to 10, and the other 2 are turned down to 0. So you got to turn them up as well. So the first voice that we have in our head is called the limbic voice. And, you know, these limbic teenagers, they don't care about anything. They just want to feel good. They don't care about school. They're experimenters, they're drinking, and they have great intentions. So they say literally quite a lot. I will literally start studying tomorrow. I will literally tidy my bedroom in 5 minutes, or in a minute. I'll do it in a minute. I'll do it in a minute. I'll literally do it in a minute. I'll do it in a minute. And they don't care. You know, there's a class test happening. It doesn't even matter. Like, I'm in 3rd year. I literally start studying next year. This year doesn't even count, and they'll not do it. So the second voice is that anxious what if, and it's literally a matter of life or death. And the third voice is the resilient voice, the masterful voice, who's a great solution-focused thinker, much more sophisticated thinker. So again, if we take that example of, we have a class test, so you get your kid to write out the 3 voices, and you might have to prompt them at the start. So the first voice is, how would that voice, the limbic voice, approach the test? And they have to write a paragraph, but they have to write a paragraph using I, because you're going to trick your brain. So I literally don't care about it. It doesn't even matter. I don't care whether I pass or fail. I couldn't be bothered doing any study. And I always assure young people, now, when you develop that voice, I promise you're not going to be like that voice. But what happens is, the limbic is the emotional system of the brain. So we're going to access more emotions. Anxious young people have a very limited repertoire of emotions. They do all the anxiety emotions, so fear, dread, worry. Usually the most positive emotion that they have is relief. Oh, thank God that I passed that. And you know, there's a couple of questions that I ask young people who are very anxious. Do you know how to be happy? And they all say no, all of them. And the other question I ask them is, when is the last time you experienced joy or delight? And they all answer the same. I can't remember. So I tell them, you'll get access to joy and delight and the possibility of happiness if you've developed that limbic. You'll never not care about the exams, trust me. You'll never not. So the second voice, they could write 6 paragraphs about it, but you have to hold it to 1 paragraph. So what is your what if voice? So write that 1 paragraph, and then 1 paragraph about which is called the prefrontal cortex, that really resilient voice. What does that resilient voice say in your, you know what, this is really important, but it isn't life or death. And I know that I understand the subjects. I have faith in myself. If I do a few hours, I should do really well. And if I get an A, I will be delighted. And if I get a B, it's not the end of the world. I know that I could do better maybe next time. Or you know what, a B is good enough. It's absolutely great. And I'm not going to put the rest of my life on hold just because of this class test. And then once your kid has written those, and as I said, you might have to prompt them at the beginning, ask them to read over the 3 voices and say, so which one do you choose to listen to now? So the anxious thoughts and the rumination is a bad neurological habit. These kids have just one way to process experience, and it's go to the what if catastrophe voice. And the best thing to do is get a journal, and every so often when an experience happens, get the 3 voices written in. And it's wonderful after maybe 4 to 6 weeks of reading back over them. The young person can see, because it's in their own handwriting, how dumb it is to listen to that voice and what that is doing to them. So that's the second one.
And you're giving them options as well.
Yeah,
you're providing other alternatives.
Absolutely.
To that voice.
It's a very choiceful. I'm choosing to be catastrophic. There are other ways now. And what happens to young people, I find all the time, it's a bit like going to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. You might just go to the meeting once and you don't stay and you keep drinking. But what AA would say is, if you come in the door, go to a meeting, it'll ruin your drinking. So that's what happens with the anxiety. It ruins their rumination piece because they know there's another way. And then steps 3 and step 4 are fairly similar. Now we've had a physiological shift. The cortisol levels are lower. We've had a psychological shift because the person is in a more optimistic, resourceful place. And then we can start physically stepping out of the comfort zone. So this level 3 is baby steps. She always sits in her bedroom. Okay, so on a Sunday, come down and have lunch with us. Only just once in the week. Take the dog for a walk. When Granny comes to visit, stay down in the living room for 5 minutes before you go up to your kitchen or to your bedroom or whatever. So those tiny things that don't push too much. And then once there's been a build-up of that, the opposite of anxiety is courage. So these kids are starting to get courage and momentum. And then stage 4 is the bigger challenges then. Now we're kind of thinking about phased returns to school. So there's loads that you can do, but it has to be well timed, because what happens so often is we have a kid whose cortisol levels are 9.5 out of 10. We're getting them to do a bit of breathing and trying to get them back to school. Yeah. I'd say good luck with that.
There's no quick fix.
There is no quick fix, yeah. And again, it's not about school. Yeah. It's about this young person's relationship with themselves. And that we have changed so much in our relationship to education. For example, we were talking about when we grew up in the 80s, if there was a test in school, maybe you're doing our O-levels or A-levels, you go into school and go, Kelly, have you done any study? No, I haven't done a tap. Have you? No, I don't. I couldn't be bothered. I'm not going to do a tap. And it was like, that was the cool status. And if you did any work, you pretended that you didn't do any work, because that was not cool. Yeah. And then let's say you got an A. The rest of us might teach you about that, about who you're the SWAT and the teacher's pet, and you did do work and you pretended that you didn't. The cool kids were the kids who were the experimenters and pushing the boat and out at the discos and drinking all the time. And that landscape has reversed it all. Where nowadays these, the centrally located adolescents are the ones who are the high academic flyers. And they're coming into school going, oh my God, Kelly, have you done that? Oh, you're so lucky you got all of that done. I've only done this, this and this. But Mum's getting me extra tuition and I'm sitting on an A-, but I really know that I can get an A+, and I'm looking for an A* in this. And that you get the status from the academic brilliance this year, and we give these kids a message that there is only one way to be a successful, valuable human being, and that's to have a master's degree. You got to get your O-level and your GCSEs and your A-levels and your degree and your master's, and then you might have a possibility of being happy, which is very different than than us. I'm not sure my parents knew exactly what degree I was doing when I went off to college. It was like, away you go and out in the world. Whereas parents are over entangled in their kids' lives now. And there's a tremendous emphasis on education. And God forbid you're not academically inclined or interested, because our society doesn't support that as much as the very academically capable kid these days, which is a bit sad.
Because I remember talking to John Barry from Queen's, and he was saying what we're producing these days are oven ready, workers.
Yeah.
It's not, nobody talks about being a plumber, nobody talks about being a joiner, nobody talks about being a nurse, because they're kind of seen as, well, now you need a degree to be a nurse, but it's all about driving kids towards academia, whether they fit that mould or not, and how damaging that is.
Absolutely.
But our whole society has kind of moved that way as well. As you said, it was totally different when we were growing up. You kind of, my mum still doesn't know what to do to this day. She's all like, how are you getting on? Is that all right? So yeah, and I mean, in terms of anxious kids as well, I think we had COVID-19, which was anxious for all of us. Now we are, we have Palestine, we have what's going on all around the world in terms of, so when you're turning on the news and you're, that is being daily fed into kids, it's bound to feed into it feeds into my anxiety, and I'm a grown adult. So how do you manage that in terms of yourself? Because as we said, cortisol kind of feeds off each other too. We
live in a cortisol saturating world, actually, and the world is very anxiety provoking for us, we're all so busy and we work so hard. So did our parents, but their lives are more simplistic, and you did a hard day's work and you came home and you were done. Whereas now, for an awful lot of people, you do a hard day's work and you're never finished. There is never a day where you go, everything that needs to be done is completely and utterly done, and tomorrow's a new day. And then, of course, we're hyper-connected because the email follows us home and all the rest of it. So we live in this hugely stressful world, and the only way to manage it is boundaries. And it is challenging to have those boundaries, to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to put that down. I'm going to minimise my news reading for the day. Because the doom scrolling is very magnetic as well. I need to know what's happening. But as you're lifting your phone, there's a couple of things happening. So first of all, you lift your phone, you get a little dopamine hit, you get a little pleasure hit from it. But then you go on the news site, or you're reading about Palestine, and what is happening is your stress levels are rising then as well. So you got a pleasure hit, and now you got a stress hit. But also, you've moved psychologically into this other world where your default mode network, your sense of self has left the building. You are a complete and utter zombie now. And it's very hard to step out. It's very, very hard to step out of that. But when you do, you're like, oh, I can plug back into my own life now. So a lot of people are walking around the world unplugged into their lives. And I think adults typically look at their phone about 430 times a day at the minute. And then we have this mental health crisis. Now, that's simplistic. I'm not just going to say it's because we do that, but it certainly is part of the picture of it as well. So having the boundaries and the ownership, and saying, choicefully, I have a relationship to my phone that the phone doesn't control me, I control the phone. I think that's the only way. And actually, if we can navigate a relationship with the phone, an awful lot of the rest of our life gets much more simple. There's space for self-care, for example. Yeah.
And I think that's interesting too, that, some parents will go, she's never off her phone, or put that phone down, and they literally automatically lift their own.
Yeah.
So they miss the modelling good behaviour. That I'm coming home at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, I'm putting my phone in the drawer, I'm making the dinner, I'm chatting to the kids, we're sitting down together, we're having an evening, having an evening meal, and then I'm going to watch a movie or something. And
absolutely.
But we forget to do that because we're so strung out on, I forgot to answer that work email, or I haven't got this piece of work finished as well. But it's remembering to connect those kind of things up as well. Yeah,
and I meet so many parents, and that's one of their complaints. She's never off her phone. She's never out of her room, never off her phone. And the kid would just automatically turn back and go, well, you're never off your phone either. So we have to negotiate, but actually everybody completes the negotiation. It's not just the young person, because it's a family epidemic these days. Yeah,
and it's relational.
Absolutely. It's relational. Yes.
How do relationships with family members and friends impact on young people and their anxiety? So I'm sure it's a double-edged sword. They can either, help with the situation or make the situation more difficult.
Well, the intuitive, so there are intuitive parenting strategies for there's essentially 3 personality styles in adolescents. And the first one's the impulsive kid that I mentioned. They don't care, and they're very activated around their feelings. So they do what they feel like doing. So I feel like sitting on Snapchat, and I don't feel like doing my homework, and I feel like playing Call of Duty, and I don't feel like loading the dishwasher, and I certainly don't feel like doing my homework or paying attention in class or whatever. So the adult world intuitively has 3 ways of relating to those kids. And the first one is nagging them. Put that phone down and get that bedroom tidied. Do you hear what I said? Have you got that bedroom tidied yet? And nagging is an expression of powerlessness. And then the second one is advice giving or lecturing. Or if you're a therapist, you call it psychoeducation. And Kelly, I made mistakes when I was your age, and I don't want you to make the same mistakes as me, and I wish I'd listened to my mum when I was her age, and I'm just telling you this for your own good. And never has an impulsive teenager goes, thanks, Mum, that is fantastic information.
You're so right.
You're such a fount of wisdom, mother. And then the third one is threatening and punishing, and most of it's threatening. If you don't get that homework done, I will throw that Xbox out the window. You're not going to the disco. You do, and if you don't do this, I'll do this. And a young fella in recently goes, I think my ma's in the menopause or something like that. So it was just, just let her rant every so often. She'll be grand. That's all you have to do. And then sometimes the threat will actually be thrown into punishment now. So, I was caught out drinking with my friends, so they took the phone off me, and I'm not allowed to the disco on a Friday night. And you go and have a good hard think to yourself. And of course, these kids don't think. So I'm sitting up in my bedroom. My mum's thinking that I'm so annoyed with my parents. But you know what? I'm actually more disappointed in myself. I know that I do make some bad decisions, and they really do have my best interests at heart. They're fantastic people, my parents. That's absolutely not what's happening. I'm sitting up my bedroom going, I hate my parents, and I've got to get cuter at not getting caught. So what happens actually with those kids is they get an awful lot of negative comments and negative strokes, even in school as well. If you're that impulsive kid, so you're all sitting here, we actually talk with microaggression, and we've microaggression in our body language as well. Kelly, get up to the top of the class so I can keep an eye on you. Stop that, sit down, turn you around. Where's that homework? Get up to the vice principal's office. And they're saturated in shame a lot of the time because the adult world is, has it in for them. And one of the things that I would say to those kids when I'm working with them, say, it sounds like everybody's on your back and you get blamed for everything. And they turn around and go, you're the only person that understands me. So this second one, well, actually, the third one, that resilient prefrontal cortex kid who's mature and sensible, and parents will say things like, "Oh, thank God she gives us no bother." So, you ever said that about your kid? They're the prefrontal cortex. We talk to those kids with interest and curiosity and warmth, and we have a quasi-adult conversation with them. It's mutual. How'd you get on the day? Very good, isn't that really interesting? But the anxious kids, there are a couple of main ways, intuitive parenting strategies that parents have, and as I said at the beginning, they don't work. So the first one is the reassuring, and how I see this played out with parents all the time is parents tilt their head to the side, and they put sympathy on their voice, and they very often don't call the child by their name. Oh, darling, how did you get on the day, wee pet? Did you have a wee panic attack, darling? Do you need a wee hug from me, pet? And one of the things that happens is parents will say, we're extremely close. She opens up and tells me all about her wee worries, and we talk an awful lot about her worries. And I say, sorry to tell you, you're not very close. She's just highly dependent on you. You've become her oxytocin generator. You're her comfort parent. That's it. So, the message you're giving to your kid is, I have no faith in you, and I don't expect you to have any faith in me, or in yourself. So this wee kid is going, she comes home from school and she's had a hard day. Oh, sweetheart. Tell you what, darling, you sit down there, pet, and I'll go and get your jammies, because we do everything for these kids. We've an urge to caretake. I get your jammies, I'll make you wee hot chocolate, and we'll have a wee talk about your feelings, pet. And then the impulsive kid, wee Charlie, overhears this and he goes, okay, can I have a hot chocolate? Get you up them stairs. Did I tell you get up and tidy that bedroom? And then he'll say later on, she's your favourite. I love all my children just the same. But actually, we have a very different way of contacting these three kids. So there's the microaggression with the impulsive one. There's the sympathy and reassurance with the second one. And then the third one is interest and curiosity. And with the anxious kids, you know, there are lots and lots and lots of very big, deep conversations, all about reassuring. But what we're talking about is what didn't go well and what might happen and what she's worried about, and in case she has another panic attack, and what she's frightened of, and all these things. They're extremely negative conversations. They're all about her limitations and her fears. So what I would say is ditch those intuitive parenting strategies. They don't work. And start to work, to talk to your kid and relate to your kid with curiosity, with interest, with warmth, with faith in herself. Inject faith in herself. And actually, just to say as well, you know, very often if there are two parents at home, what happens is one parent sees this comfort parent thing happening. And let's say mum's the comfort parent, for example. Dad is not. But he watches this and he sees that it's actually not working. So he will intuitively try a different stance. So he becomes a no-nonsense parent. So, like, there is no comfort to be got, no oxytocin from this parent. So, you know, she's got a dance class on Monday and mum says, sweetheart, I'm not going to be able to leave you to the dance class. Daddy's going to take you. I don't want daddy to take me. I want you to take me. And that's wonderful for the mum because it's wonderful to be loved that much and somebody needs. So it feeds into mum as well. But anyway, dad gets to take her and she doesn't talk to him in the car and she starts crying. She doesn't want to go to the class. Get out of the car and stop your whinging. You'll be grand. Go on out. Your wee sister went in. No nonsense there. Stop your blubbering. And what happens very often is there is alienation of that parent. You know, he has no relevance in my life whatsoever. I'd never talk to the man about anything. Then these kids get phobic. I can't cope with the sound of him breathing. And I can't cope with the sound of him chewing. Can't sit with the same man in the room. I just like see daddy. I don't want to be near him. I just want to be with mummy all the time. And I see an awful lot of parental conflict and parental separation happens at those points. There's also a point with the impulsive teenager that we're not going into as well today. So there's high conflict. You know, you're parenting as a comfort parent and I'm the no nonsense because I'm trying to do something. I see that's not working, so I'm trying in desperation to do something else. None of them are working. So we have high conflict between us and it's all about the anxious kid. We're preoccupied with her and we're fighting about, you know, I'll say to you, Kelly, you're far too soft on her and if you would do this, that, and you mollycoddle her and that's your, and you're telling me, shut up, you don't understand. So it's actually what happens is you as a comfort parent have more of a relationship with the kid than you have with me. And eventually our relationship grinds to a halt. There's high conflict parenting happening. And then, you know, when parents separate, it's utterly devastating for kids. Not these kids. You know, when my dad moves out, I'm like, bye, don't forget your suitcase on the way out. Wonderful. I have mummy all to myself. Yeah. And actually what I see playing out more and more is these kids go on hunger strike. You know, I have to go to daddy's. So I go to daddy's at the weekend, I don't eat. Gee, we can't have a kid not eating for the whole weekend, so it's not possible to go to dad's, even if the court has decreed it. So I get to stay with mum all the time, and there's absolute alienation of that other parent. And essentially, that's how these kids can figure in their life. If it gives me comfort, if it's a person, a place, or a thing that gives me comfort, it gets into my comfort zone. And if it doesn't, out it goes. It bears no relevance. It feels threatening to me. I have no interest in it. It's a very dualistic way to live. Yeah.
Extremely manipulative as well in terms of, well, it's all working for you, you know.
Well, you know, people often say that it's manipulative or these kids are very controlling. I would say these kids are utterly out of control. And it's not manipulation at all. It's desperation. So it's a lack of control and desperation. It looks like manipulation, but it's absolutely not calculated. It's I cannot cope without mum. I have got whatever it takes. I've got to stay with my comfort parent because I am so overwhelmed and threatened in the world. Yeah. So they get a bad press. They get the manipulation, control piece a lot of the time, but that is not their phenomenological experience at all, actually. Yeah.
I'm glad you clarified that, Bronagh.
Thank you.
Bronagh, this has been absolutely fascinating, hence why we've chatted for so long. If you had one piece of advice for parents with anxious teenagers, what would that be?
It would be, well, maybe two pieces of advice. One is lower everyone's cortisol levels. Google. You know, if you're on your phone, use your phone wisely and start Googling and get into a relationship with cortisol lowering. And the second one is change how you make contact with your kid. You know, lift the head up, stop tilting the head, call them by their name and inject that hope. So rather, oh, darling, how are you today, pet? Do you need a wee hug from mummy? Kelly, hello, it's great to see you. Tell me a couple of things that went well today in school. So changing that would give them a huge message of, I have faith in you.
I'm treating you as a human being.
As a human being.
Yeah, let's see what's good out there in the world, as opposed to feeding the anxiety.
Yeah.
Bronagh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you. It's been great.
So thanks to my guest, Bronagh Starrs. For further information on relationship support, briefing papers and other podcasts, check out relateni.org. You can also listen to these podcasts from your regular platforms.